Hey everybody, welcome back. We got a lot to talk about today. I've been sitting in here all morning long listening to music on these, the Brute, and I've had a lot of fun with these, and I've got a lot to share with you guys. When I first started this, I had this idea about how to make this and make it in a way that takes it above and beyond a lot of the old school stuff you see out there now. And I've looked at a lot of that old school throwback designs, and I've had some of them in here. I've tested some. I've made upgrades for some of the models. And it was very reminiscent of what was made back in the day, and some of the same mistakes were still present. I mean, there was a reason we got away from big, wide baffle, shoebox shaped speakers sitting on the floor and went to smaller, narrower speakers higher up on a stand and smaller, faster drivers. There's reasons that we went in that direction. But I felt like there was still something to be had going back to the old school style, but doing it right and doing it in a way that would approach some of the aspects that we get from a more modern style speaker. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. The driver complement that you see here in the Bravo, our M130 woofer, which we've used for years, love that little woofer, and the T26 tweeter. It's the same driver complement that's in the top of the Brute. So they share some similarities. To me, in my mind, though, it was going to be a trade-off. It was going to be, is it going to be worth it? I know as soon as this baffle starts getting wider, the tendency is for everything to sound as if it's playing from that baffle forward. That just happens. That's just the physical limitations, and it's something that you have to deal with when that baffle starts getting wider. That's just the effect. So there are some things that I did to try and minimize that. Obviously, I shifted the drivers all the way over to one side. So we don't have the surface reflection on this inside area here, and we don't have the same surface reflections in all directions. If I would have centered the drivers down the middle, the diffraction and the surface reflections would have been the same on both sides of the baffle, and it would have created a hump or a presence there in the response that would be higher. It would be, this one plus the one across the top. It's more emphasis all in one area, and that's bad. It's better that it's asymmetrical and that the surface reflections are smaller and in multiple areas rather than all in one big spot. So doing that helped a lot. And I wanted to see if I could approach what we get out of the X Series Bravo and even the Encore, which uses the larger 6.5-inch woofer. I do a lot with these speakers with the crossover design and maintaining phase coherency and the quality of the parts to maintain the spatial cues and things that are in the higher frequency ranges, so that when you set these on stands and you bring them out in the room, it's very holographic. It's very three-dimensional and layered. And a lot of the guys who've reviewed these, even recently, have talked about just how they excel in that area, how much more layered and three-dimensional they are than most stand-mounted speakers. And I was afraid I was going to give some of that up going to this bigger baffle. And at first, I set them up and I moved them way out into the room because I wanted to see or hear what I could do with them. How much or how close can I get to the stand-mounted speakers? And at first, and I burned them in for 2 or 3 days of nonstop play. So right now I'm 50-something hours in. So the woofers and the drivers are they're close to a burn-in settled rate. They're at least halfway there. The capacitors, especially that little bypass cap that I put on the tweeter circuit, they're a quarter of the way there. So I know they're going to smooth out a little more. It's going to open up a little more still. But I was able to get a pretty good impression of what it was doing. And I was getting really good image depth and good layering within the soundstage, but not so much to the outside of the soundstage. I wasn't getting the width that I normally get out of the smaller speakers. And I think a lot of that had to do with the surface reflection of the baffle and the way I had them towed in like I normally do in this room. It kind of aimed a little bit towards me, and it just seemed like it was a little more present from that baffle forward. And I thought about it. I thought, a lot of that has to do with the reflection angle of this, and it's more toward me. So I took the speakers and I towed them out a little more so that they're a little closer to me and straight into the room than they are aimed right at me. So this reflection then was more present going past me and not at me. And that helped a lot. It opened up the sound stage, and I got some of the width that I normally get out of the little ones. And I would say, as far as three-dimensional layering, I got within 98% or so, maybe 97% of what I get with the smaller version. Was that a worthwhile trade-off? And compare that to everything else that I got out of this? Absolutely. And let me tell you about some of that stuff too. Let's talk about, first of all, the mid-range. The smaller, faster drivers, they just settle quicker, and they're usually cleaner. And I've talked about how you can use inline filters to remove the lower octave off of these things, off of any stand-mounted speaker for that matter, and how you're minimizing its cone movement. You're taking about half the cone movement away from it by putting an inline filter in there and just removing the first octave. If you remove the first octave and a half, you're removing a lot of the workload off of it. The driver excursion is limited by a lot. And so instead of it having to play vocals while bass notes are doing this, bass notes are only doing this. And it's able to play a lot of those smaller, faster, higher frequency ranges a lot cleaner and less distortion because the cone isn't moving so fast. Same thing applies to this bigger model. When we go in and we drop this bigger woofer in the bottom, we've got a big capacitor in line with the mid-bass driver. So we're removing all the lows off of it. And I'm using a good quality poly cap with a small bypass cap. And it does so pretty cleanly. So we're removing everything. Well, it's flat to about, it's still good extension down to a little below 200 hertz. So we're really moving a lot off it. So not much bass is having to be covered by it, but it is covering all that vocal region. So it makes the vocal region a lot cleaner, less distortion. You can really play it a lot louder with no stress at all. And then you've got all the lows being handled by this eminence driver. It's called the Acoustinator. And it is a very fast driver for a 12-inch driver. It's a lighter weight cone, and it's got a good motor structure on it to control it. And the way I've loaded it is in a sealed box. So it's tighter. You don't have the group delay if you would with a ported box. It also keeps the box smaller. So there was a lot of advantages going into that. Now let's talk about the Eminence woofer and why I chose it and what I was able to do with it. I know if you look at the back of it, you think, man, that thing looks pretty wimpy. There's no motor structure there, but actually there is. This is a neodymium magnet. It's designed to be a guitar amplifier speaker, and it's got pretty high sensitivity on it. I know it doesn't look like much, but this is a lot of motor structure when it's all neodymium. And because this is lightweight, because the cone's lightweight, and they can put this on a stamped steel frame, and it's not that big a deal because you're not slinging a lot of mass, you're not having to support a lot of mass. It's just not a problem at all. So let's look at the response of this thing when you put it into a sealed box and what I was able to get out of it, because there's a little trickery involved there. Let me get to some printouts that I made for you guys to look at. So the frequency response when you put this in a sealed box looks a little like this. I hope you guys can see this okay. This driver is 94.5 dB sensitivity, which is a lot higher sensitivity than what the actual speaker is. And keep in mind, when you put a driver into a small box like this, you have what's called baffle step loss. So it becomes three-dimensional as frequency decreases. So as you start going below 900 hertz or so, a lot of the output from this woofer is wrapping around the cabinet. It's going to the back. It's going in an omni pattern, so you're losing output moving forward. So what you have to do is you have to take that bass response that's dropped off like this, and you have to bring all the rest of it down to make a flat response. So you're compensating for the baffle step loss. With this speaker, you're not having to compensate for as much loss, and we're actually pulling the lows out of this driver, and then we're filling it with this bigger woofer. So we don't have as much step loss. So sensitivity of the little X Bravo here is 87. Sensitivity of the Brute, 90. So we're not having to deal with a bunch of baffle step loss. We're covering it with this larger woofer. So we're at 94.5 dB sensitivity, and then it starts rolling off pretty early because it's in a sealed box. And I want to say the roll off is kind of starting around 100 to 80, 90 here, and then it's just really starting to drop off. What we do then is we put a big inductor on this thing. So you put a big inductor on it, and what it does is it not only starts rolling it off way up here, it pulls the output way down. So we're pulling the output down to where it's at 90 dB down low, and then it's extending way out here but into the upper region because it just has a single inductor on it. So then what we do is we put, in addition to that inductor, we put a capacitor in the path right here. And what that does is it keeps it flatter longer, and then it makes it fall a lot more steeply. And then the mid-bass driver, it already has a natural roll-off, and then it has a big capacitor in line with it. So it's matching those roll-offs, and it's creating a flat response that's about 90 dB. And then what used to be, the 3 dB down was way up here. Now the 3 dB down is way down here. And so the measured 3 dB down response on it, from my measurements, came in about 32 hertz, which is really good. So it's playing down really low, and at 20 hertz, it's down, about 6 dB. By the measurements I took, it was right at 5 dB when I did a near field measurement. Now, we're going to talk about that too. Before I get to the near field measurement, let's look at all of the measurements on this thing. And let's look at the crossover response first. Let's look at what I was able to do with this thing. Notice a really flat response, and we got a tweeter that's capable of playing down low, and that really helps in this design. It's crossing about 1800 hertz, crossing to the little M130, and then the big woofer crossing below it down there, just below 200. On axis frequency response, it's flat. I mean, it's plus or minus a dB just all the way across. Vertical off axis also looks fantastic. That means as you move up vertically, because the close acoustic center spacing is really close, and the crossover point is really low. As you go up vertically, you're not changing the time arrival between these drivers very much, so we're maintaining a really good vertical off-axis response. Even at 18 inches above tweeter axis, which is the green line, it still looks really good. Horizontal off-axis, we took those in both directions because it's an asymmetrical baffle, and the alignment on it is a little asymmetrical. So the off-axis is a little different in each way. So off-axis to the inside, this is what it looks like there, and you'll see a couple of small little humps there around 1500 and 2500, but that's actually still pretty flat. Remember, this is on a 5 dB scale, so that's still within a couple of dB. And then as you go off-axis in the other direction, those little humps are still kind of there in the off-axis, but they've switched places where the off-axis in this direction, the smaller one was below or at 1500 and the bigger one was at 25. Now they've kind of switched places, so the overall off-axis is pretty consistent. Now the impedance curve is balanced. It's an easy 8 ohm load. In fact, we're a little above 8 ohm, almost 10 ohm load, so you can drive these things with anything. Tube amps, power amps, big solid state chip amps, anything you want, you can stick on these things. Now, here's a really cool part. Let's look at the spectral decay, and you'll notice just how clean it drops off. So not a lot of stored energy anywhere. You hit it with a signal, and it plays it, and it stops. So I'm really happy with that. And now let's look at something I don't normally do. And I know you guys ask me about this a lot, and you see people doing it on other websites where they'll they'll take a measurement that's a 1 watt 1 meter, which is an industry standard, and then they'll go up to the woofer and they'll take a near field measurement and look at the output level as it rolls off down low, and then they'll splice it in. Problem with splicing that stuff in is it's actually involves quite a few variables, and at what crossover point, or I should say at what frequency you cross the two curves or blend the two curves, will change the response and the levels that because you have to adjust the level down really low when you do the low frequency near field. That changes everything as well. So you have to be able to adjust it so that it's balanced, and you have to figure out exactly where you want them to blend in order for it to represent a accurate response. So when I see people doing this a lot, sometimes those variables are really off. If you look at all the measurements in stereo file that John Atkinson takes, and I love that he takes all those measurements, and my favorite thing about all of his measurement taking is he does it the same every time. So it's consistent, and you can make really good comparisons. But if you look at the way he splices in the low frequency, it's always at a little higher level than the rest of the speakers. So you always see a humped up bottom end on all of his measurements that aren't really indicative of that speaker. And so I think it's a little misleading. And I don't want to be misleading when I post the measurements. Everything below 200 has a lot more to do with the room and how you place the speaker in the room and the room gains that you get more than the speaker itself. You know, when we do a box alignments don't create big humps at the bottom end. You know, the roll off is very predicted. It rolls off pretty smoothly, and it can be predicted in a sealed box or a ported box. So usually I don't even really look at what's going on below that region, because I know what it's doing, and I can look at the impedance curve and I see the tuning frequency, and I know how it's going to roll off, and I can model it, and it's very predictable. And I don't want to just take an in-room response measurement to show what it's doing, because that's not a speaker response. That's a room response, and that's another variable that's different everywhere. But I wanted you guys to see exactly what this thing is capable of, and I did do a near field measurement, and I did splice it in, and I balanced it, and here's the frequency response with the added near field measurement spliced in, so you can see the low frequency extension, and you can see it rolling off at the bottom with a nice, first or sealed box curve. I'll say that. And it's showing 3 dB down. It's pretty much 32 hertz. So bass response is good. And I noticed that in all the listening comparisons that I've been doing. I had to, when I decided I wanted to blend the servo subs, which I've got triple open baffle servo subs that I played on and off. I turn them off, I turn them on. And I had to set the crossover point a little below 30 to get a nice blend with these things. And adjust the levels so that it blended well. And there are certain tracks I listen to make sure that it's blended. But for most music, I could have left them off. They went down that well, and the bass was tight. It was clean. And like I said, this morning I spent over an hour just listening to music on these things, and I went from Alison Krauss to Vienna Tang and everything in between. And I loved these things. Was the trade-off worth it to go to a wider baffle to gain what was brought to the table by removing the lows from this driver and adding this big woofer? Like I said, absolutely. This thing is fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun. Everything I threw at it. When I played Niles Lofgren, the string instrument that he's playing, the guitar, you could just feel every note. You could feel every string. It was very vibrant, very alive. And you just don't get that from a smaller monitor. Even with the smaller monitor and the subs added, you can get a flat response. But this brought a presence and a vibrance that was a lot of fun. Bass notes, the texture of kick drums and things were just outstanding. I even threw a little bit of AC/DC at it. I put some Metallica on, and I played the song One from Metallica's Injustice for All. And were the double bass hits fantastic? Yeah, yeah, they were. They were killing it. But I got goosebumps on the intro, just the single guitar intro on it, and all of the noises of the war and stuff were really within the sound stage, just placed and big, and the guitar was so real. I could, like I said, I could feel each string, and it gave me goosebumps. Also got goosebumps on Eva Cassidy's Fields of Gold. Oh man, the vocals that I'm getting out of these things right now are just fantastic. They're just hanging in space back there between the speakers, and it's just beautiful. And even Vienna Tang, her vocals, her piano, really natural. I just went through everything, listening to some Jack Johnson, and just the tonality of his voice and the presence of his voice. That, you know, a lot of this big woofer is picking up some of those lower breathy body of the vocal, and it was extremely real. At this point, I would have to think that if I could pick any of our speakers that are a single pair of speakers, if I just had one pair of speakers, and that excludes the big in Exoticas or in Extremes that are 7 feet tall, because those are a 4-piece speaker. Those are big open baffle speakers with servo subs. If I could just go, if I had just a single stand mounted speaker or a single speaker pair of everything we've done, I'd have to take these. They do everything well. They do everything you can throw at them. They're high sensitivity. They're high power handling. I had some big 120 watt dot audio tube amps sitting here on them, and pounded on these things, and it just ate up everything I could throw at it, as much power as I could throw at it. I had fun with old Pink Floyd. I listened to The Wall and Another Brick in the Wall, all of those songs, and the kick drum was just, it was real, it was vibrant, it was engaging, and I feel like any small fraction of performance that I lost going from the little small baffle to the big baffle, there is still just a little bit more transparency there with the smaller speaker. I didn't really miss it. I loved it. I had fun with it. It was the kind of speaker that no matter what I wanted to listen to, it was awesome, and I loved it. And the little woofer, I'm impressed with it. This Eminence woofer. I've got to go to Kentucky. I'll leave tomorrow, big road trip. I've got to go compete in the Masters Indoor National Championships in Louisville, Kentucky. And Eminence is less than an hour away, so I'm going to probably visit those guys while I'm there. And I'll probably have to order several hundred more of these things to have them in stock, because these things are going to fly out the door. I mean, and they should. The performance on these things, they're fantastic. And I'm really happy with how this woofer turned out. I don't have any issues with the frame or anything else. If it were like our servo subs, where our servo subs are throwing a heavier mass, and there's 18 millimeters of X-Max each way, there's a lot of force there, and it requires a big motor structure. And this is a ceramic magnet, so it looks a lot huger than if it were a neodymium magnet. And when you're throwing that much mass and you're having to support this much weight, which is about 20 pounds, you need a great big old cast frame. You need something to support and hold that. When you've got something that's a lightweight, neodymium motor, the moving mass is fairly lightweight. The X-Max is not that far. You don't need a heavy cast frame, and you're not playing this into a high enough frequency range to excite any ringing of the frame, because it's only playing low frequency. The long wavelengths don't cause the stamp steel frame to ring. So I'm pretty okay with it, and it's not that expensive, and it's going to keep the price of this whole thing in an affordable range. So, big question. What did we come up with price-wise for these things? So, and I thought about offering it like I do some of my entry-level stuff. Here's the base level, and then you can add upgrades as you want. But I decided, when you get to a three-way design like this, and you're throwing in another set of woofers and bigger coils and big caps, you're already starting to get up there in price. You're already starting to approach that $800 to $900 range. And I thought at that point, spend a couple $100, put the good caps in it. I'll maybe put the bypass caps in there as an option. and that'll add to it. But the base level that I'm going to offer it with is with the sonic caps on the tweeter circuit, all the little bypass caps, and on the bigger poly caps, which are all JB caps, and it's with tube connectors. And that price for the whole thing, for the whole kit, came to $1,195. So for less than $1,200, you can buy everything you need to build these out. You can download the plans there online. You can buy you some MDF and cut these things out, build them yourself. If you don't want to build it yourself, as far as cutting out all the cabinets, there will be a flat pack available. Now, there's a lot involved in the flat pack. There was a lot of programming time, a lot of CNC machining. If you saw the video we did previously where you could see inside, you'd see all the braces. The braces are just lined up in this thing about every 3 inches, and it's solid as a rock. And that's one of the reasons that the bass response sounded so clean, was I didn't have a lot of cabinet resonances that I hear immediately when I listen to a lot of these newer throwback speakers. They're lightly constructed, they're lightly braced, and when you're used to hearing big open baffle speakers and servo subs that have no cabinet, as soon as you hear bass through a box speaker that has cabinet resonance, it just sticks out immediately. It's like, oh man, there's that box speaker sound, there's that boominess, there's all that resonance that's built in. Wasn't getting that with these because they're so well braced, and I line them with no res. It takes 3 sheets of no res, so that price doesn't include the 3 sheets of no res that you're going to need to load them up as well. So I'll have all the pricing on the website. There's going to be a flat pack price, and the flat pack itself is going to be $800 for all the CNC cut flat pack. There's going to be a version to get it fully assembled in MDF, and that's $1,100. There's also going to be some finished veneered options and fully completed options as well. And when we do that, Joey comes up, picks up all the kit, all the parts, takes them down there to Denton where all that stuff's CNC cut, and those guys are doing the full assembly on it. So I'm not even making money on the assembly or the cabinet. So that's all of those guys that used to work for me, and they kind of still do work for me. I'm letting them kind of run their own business, so to speak, and offering that because we just can't really do it here. I can't store and warehouse cabinets like this. I'd have to buy a bigger warehouse. So when you order stuff like that custom made, it is custom made. You order a finished version of this, it's going to be built when you order it. So you have to be patient. It'll take 2 to 3 weeks, somewhere in that range, to get these fully built if you order them fully built. If you just order the kit goes out right away. $1,195. It goes out the door, and you guys can build these things out. I know you'll be pleased with them. It's one of my new favorites. Like I said, if I had to pick between all of our speakers and just one pair of speakers, I'd pick this pair. I like them that much. They're that good at everything, and they'll give me goosebumps. That says a lot. And there's nothing I could throw at it that they didn't do really well. Now, granted, when you guys put these in your room, if you stick these up against a wall and you've got a bare wall and you've got empty corners and you start throwing a bunch of juice at these, they're going to load the room. You're going to get heavy bottom end if you don't get them 2 or 3 feet off the wall and you don't treat your room a little bit. Tube traps in the corner. You want to absorb some low frequency because you don't have flexibility to just turn this up or down like you would with if you had a little mini monitor with a sub. Then you can vary your subwoofer levels and you can balance things out, and there's a lot of flexibility there. You don't have that with these, so keep in mind you're going to have to put them in a average size room. If you put them into a small room that's not much bigger than a Texas closet, I say that some of us have big closets down here, especially the women, it's going to overload the room. If you put it in a small to medium-sized room with a lot of treatment, you're in great shape. Medium-sized to bigger rooms with some treatment, they're going to be fine. And the way I have them out in the room like this, they're probably 8 feet out in the room. Oh, my goodness, do they sound good. Very three-dimensional. Like I said, within 97% of what I'm getting with these, but full range and great sound. Now, the next version that we're doing of this thing is going to be the Bully. And the Bully is going to have an MTM version of these, which is going to shoot the sensitivity up to 94 dB. And it's going to have one of these big servo subs in the bottom of it, which will play flat to 20 hertz, and it's going to give you the flexibility to balance out that output a little bit. So you'll have a volume control just on that, and you'll be able to adjust the damping settings and the extension filters, and there'll be an EQ built in, so you can, if you've got a peak in your room, you can dial it back and balance it out. Not so with the Brute, so keep in mind you may have to do a little more in your room to put a full-size speaker into your room, so keep that in mind. I guess that's it for this one. I appreciate you guys sticking with me through this one. I know this is a little bit longer video, but I had a lot to throw out there, and I'm really excited about this speaker, the Brute, and I can't wait to listen to it a little more today before I have to leave and go on my trip to Kentucky. You guys have a good week, and thank you for watching again, and thank you for subscribing. If you haven't, click the subscribe button so you'll get notification when these videos drop, and I'll see you guys in the next video.